I was standing on the porch, thinking about how some towns breathe like people. And Macomb was one of those towns. Slow, sticky, and full of its own opinions. You could feel the heat before you even stepped outside. Like the air was deciding whether or not it wanted to let you move through it. And I kept thinking, how can a place be tired before the day even starts? But that was Macomb. Tired and old. And watching everything without admitting it was watching. I was a kid then. Too young to understand that grown-ups weren't smarter, just louder. My brother Jen was beside me, poking at a crack in the porch wood like he expected treasure to fall out. And I remember thinking, you'd think people would fix things when they crack. But around here, they just let cracks become a part of the house. Kind of like they let cracks become part of themselves. Then there was Dill. Tiny, curious, buzzing with ideas he didn't know how to sit still with. He was standing across the street at the Radley house. The one place nobody looked at directly, but everyone talked about like it was a living creature. And Dill said, I bet I could make Boo Radley come out. Just like that. Like dragging a ghost into daylight was something you could do with enough imagination and stick. I remember my first thought being, why would you want to disturb something that's already hiding? But then again, I was a curious kid. The kind that would watch ants for 20 minutes and then wonder why the world was so big and I was so small. The Radley house sat there like it knew it scared people. The shutters looked like eyelids that never blinked. The yard was the kind of yard that made the world feel bigger because you didn't want to step on it. And I kept thinking, if people leave something alone long enough, they start believing their own stories about it. We walked toward the fence, even though we pretended we weren't walking towards it. That's the thing about kids. We always think nobody can tell what we're doing when it's painfully obvious. Jen whispered, don't touch the gate. So of course, I reached out and touched the gate. You'd think fear would stop you from doing dumb things. But curiosity moves faster than fear when you're young. I expected the house to do something. Groan, whisper, breathe. But it just sat there, quiet and swollen with secrets. And I thought, maybe the scariest things aren't loud. Maybe the scariest things are the ones that refuse to speak. We ran back to the street, like the ground was on fire beneath us. Dill was laughing in that breathless way he always did when danger made him excited instead of afraid. And then Jen looked back at the house like he'd accidentally taken something from it. Not a physical thing, but a piece of his silence, When we got home, Atticus was sitting in his chair reading. The kind of reading that wasn't really about the book, but about the quiet. He looked at us without lifting his head fully, like he knew exactly where we'd been. And I kept thinking, adults have a way of seeing things you don't say. But Atticus didn't lecture us. He didn't scold us. He just said, stay away from that place. Not because it's dangerous, but because people deserve privacy. And that confused me more than any rumor ever could have. Privacy. A simple word I didn't understand yet. I remember feeling something peculiar then. Something like guilt mixed with curiosity. The feeling you get when you realize you crossed a line you didn't know was there. And you'd think that would stop us. But instead, it just made the mystery feel bigger. But that's how Macomb worked. The quieter something was, the louder the stories became. And we were kids with too many questions and not enough answers, living in a town that thought it already knew everything. That was the beginning, not of the trouble, but of the noticing of people, the noticing of silence, the noticing of the difference between what's said and what's true. And I didn't know it then, but that little house with the shuttered eyes would end up teaching us more than justice, fear, and kindness than anyone in town ever talked about out loud. School started, and I remember waking up thinking the day was already too long. I was brushing my teeth and thinking about how teachers always act like they invented learning. You'd think they realized kids learn more from watching grown-ups mess up than from any book. But teachers always want order, and kids always bring noise. That's just the deal. I walked to school with Jen, and he was doing that older brother walk, slightly faster, slightly taller, slightly too cool to be seen caring that I existed. And I thought, it's strange how someone can love you and still not want to be near you on a school morning. But that's how siblings are, confused little loyalties wrapped in pride. The classroom smelled like chalk, pretending to be important. Miss Caroline was wearing a dress that looked like it wanted to teach more than she did. She was young. The kind of young that still believed rules work on everybody. And I remember thinking, she doesn't know this town yet. She doesn't know how stories float in the air like pollen. She asked where I learned to read. At home, I said, which was the truth. But the truth didn't make her happy. It made her uncomfortable. Like I'd broken some secret rule about when brains are allowed to turn on. She told me to stop reading at home. And I thought, how do you unlearn something that keeps happening every time your eyes see words? You think adults would want you to know more, not less. But sometimes adults get nervous when kids grow past the lines they planned for them. The whole day felt like that, learning one thing while being told another. During recess, I sat under a tree and thought about how strange it was that adults could be so smart and still miss the point. And while I was thinking that, Walter Cunningham walked past me. Walter was one of those kids who carried silence like it was part of his clothes. Clean, neat, polite. The kind of polite that comes from knowing what you don't have. His family never took anything they couldn't return. Not food, not favors, not hope. I invited him to lunch because I thought that's what you do when someone has something. But on the way home, Jim saw him and suddenly insisted, "Walter, eat with us." And I was thinking, why is Jen being so nice today? Then I remembered that Jen had a soft spot for underdogs. As long as nobody saw him caring. At the table, Walter poured syrup on everything. Meat, vegetables, maybe even the plate itself. I stared at him because I couldn't help it. It looked bizarre watching syrup flood a meal like that. I was about to ask him why he was ruining perfectly good food. But Calpurnia shot me a look that could carve my whole personality into a better shape. She told me to stop acting superior. I was just confused. But confusion looks a lot like judgment if you're not careful. It was peculiar. One moment, I thought I was being helpful. The next moment, I was the rude one. Adults do that. They change the meaning of a moment faster than kids can understand it. After lunch, I sat on the porch and thought about Walter's syrup and Calpurnia's scolding and the way certain people in Macomb move through life like they owe the world something just for breathing. And I realized something that felt too big for my age. Kindness isn't always what you think it is. Sometimes kindness is quiet. Sometimes it's inevitable. Sometimes it means leaving people and their ways alone. The afternoon sun stretched across the yard like an old dog deciding where to nap. I kept thinking about Boo Radley, Walter Cunningham, Miss Caroline. Atticus reading in his chair, and how everyone seemed to be living by rules nobody explained to me. Macomb felt like a code book that everyone else had skimmed before I was born. And I knew, just knew, that the year was going to teach me things nobody intended to teach me. Things whispered between grown-up footsteps. Things hidden inside people's silence. Things too complicated for rules and too human for lessons. Things a mockingbird might understand before a child. I was walking behind Atticus that night, and it was peculiar how the street lamp light didn't touch him at all. It was like the darkness respected him. Like even shadows stepped aside when he paused. And I remember thinking, How can a man be so calm when the whole town is cracking like an old porch step? He didn't tell me where he was going, and I didn't ask. I just followed his footsteps because sometimes following a quiet man is louder than following a whole crowd. And I was thinking how funny it is that grown folks always say children don't understand things, but most of them don't understand themselves. When we reached the jail, it felt like the air had weight, like you had to push through it with your shoulders. Tom Robinson was inside, sitting in the dark, probably wondering why justice always arrives late and limps when it walks. And Atticus sat down in front of the doorway with his book, like he came there to read bedtime stories to all the danger in the world. And that's when the cars came. They rolled up slow, like men pretending they weren't scared of their own intentions. And I saw their hats and smelled the sourness of fear under their breath. It's strange how hatred makes grown men look like lost boys trying to impress each other. They kept saying Atticus should move. And I kept thinking how peculiar it was. Every one of them could have gone home and slept peacefully. But instead, they came here to break something they didn't build. I didn't even realize my legs carried me forward until I was standing next to Atticus. I was telling myself, "You fool, why are you doing this?" But then my mouth opened anyway. Like courage was borrowing my voice without asking. I said hello to Mr. Cunningham. That's all, just hello. And I started talking about his son and his crops and the time he paid Atticus in hickory nuts. And I was thinking, this is ridiculous. Why am I talking about nuts when everybody here wants to do something terrible? But the weird thing is, it worked. His face cracked open a little, like he remembered he had a heart tucked somewhere under all that anger. And he told the others to go home, and they did. Just like that, they walked off, leaving their rage where it stood, like they realized it didn't belong to them anymore. Tom exhaled inside that dark jail cell. Atticus closed his book. And I stood there wondering why adults always make things complicated when kindness is usually standing there waving its arms like, "Hey, I'm right here. Use me." That was the night I learned something that felt heavier than the whole state of Alabama. People don't always turn into monsters. Sometimes they forget they're human. And sometimes a child's voice, small, shaky, unsure, reminds him. The courthouse felt different that day. Like the walls were listening. Like the wooden benches had spent years collecting secrets and were finally ready to spill them. And I remember thinking how peculiar it was that justice was supposed to be blind. Yet everyone in their room could see exactly what was going to happen long before it did. We walked in through the colored balcony entrance because that's where Reverend Sykes said we belonged. I didn't understand why a place so big has such small-minded rules. And as I climbed the steps, I kept thinking, why do adults build buildings just to break the people they built them for? The whole town was already there. People fanning themselves with papers, whispering about Tom Robinson like they came to watch a storm instead of a trial. Atticus was standing at his desk, organizing files he didn't really need to organize. That's something he did when he was bracing himself for disappointment. And I remember thinking, I should go down there and hold his hand. But I didn't. Kids rarely do the brave thing at the right time. When the trial started, the truth felt like a bird inside the room, flapping, bumping into the ceiling, trying to find a way out while everyone pretended they didn't see it. And then Mayella Ewell took the stand. She walked stiff, like she rehearsed her sadness in the mirror. And I felt bad for her, even while I didn't trust a word she said. That's the strange thing about pain. It can make someone a liar without their permission. And when she cried, I found myself thinking, maybe she ain't evil. Maybe she's just drowning and pulling everyone else under so she doesn't go alone. Then Bob Ewell swaggered in, all vinegar and cheap cologne. He had that look men get when they think cruelty is a birthright. Every sentence he spoke felt sticky, like something crawled across her skin. And I saw Atticus looking at him the way a man looks at a rattlesnake. Not scared, just aware it might strike for no reason. But when Tom Robinson stood up, that's when everything shifted. He didn't look like a criminal. He didn't look like a liar. He looked like a man caught in someone else's story. And I caught myself thinking, why does the truth sound so simple when a good man says it, but so complicated when a bad man pretends it isn't? Atticus showed everyone the bruises on Mayella were on the wrong side of her face, the side Tom couldn't have hit. And people shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, like maybe the truth had crawled across their skin now. And for the first time all day, I thought, maybe this place can do the right thing. Maybe justice needed somebody patient enough to explain it slowly. But the air was heavy. Heavy in that way where you know a storm ain't coming. It's already here. When Atticus finished his closing argument, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes like he was tired of seeing things too clearly. And I thought, that's what honesty costs you. It charges your spirit instead of your wallet. Then the jury left, and we waited and waited. It felt like the whole courthouse was holding its breath, afraid to exhale, hope too loudly in case it scared the verdict away. I kept watching the jury door, thinking, maybe the truth is strong enough this time. Maybe the day is different. Maybe adults finally grew up. But when the men came back, they didn't look up. None of them. And I knew, before the words were spoken, before the gravel echoed, before Tom's shoulders sagged, I knew. The air bent that day. Bent in a way that never bent back. because the truth won the argument, but the lie won the vote. After the verdict, nobody talked. That was the strangest part. You'd think people would whisper or argue or say something about justice or shame or whatever adults say when they know they messed up. But the whole courthouse just emptied, like someone pulled the plug on the room. We watched from the balcony as Atticus packed up his papers. He moved slow in that way a man moves when he's trying not to show his children that something inside him cracked. And I remember thinking, how can someone look so strong and so tired at the same time? It was peculiar, like watching a lighthouse flicker. Reverend Sykes told us to stand when he passed. "Your father's passing," he said. And I didn't understand why standing was supposed to fix anything. But my legs stood anyway. Sometimes respect is all we have when everything else falls apart. We walked home in silence. Even the town looked guilty, like the buildings knew they should have leaned forward and listened harder. And I kept waiting for Atticus to say something like, "It'll be all right," or "We'll try again," or even, "I'm proud of you kids for behaving." But he didn't say anything like that. He just placed his hand on my head, barely, like a feather landing. And I kept walking. That little touch felt heavier than the entire courthouse. Later that night, Jim sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. He looked older, not taller, not broader, just older in that sad way people look when they realize the world isn't what they hoped it was. And I remember thinking, childhood ends the moment you learn the truth doesn't always win. He kept saying, "It ain't right, Scout. It just ain't right." Over and over. Like he was trying to convince the world to listen if he repeated himself enough times. I didn't know what to say, so I sat beside him. Sometimes sitting next to someone is louder than any advice you could give. And while he talked about juries and fairness and why grown men lie so easily, I watched his fist clench and unclench, like he was trying to grip justice with his bare hands. That's when Atticus walked in. He leaned against the door frame like he'd been holding the whole house up with his shoulders. "Jim," he said softly, "they've done it before. They did it today. They'll do it again. And when they do, it seems that only children weep." And I felt something inside me tremble. Not fear, not sadness, something else. Something like the first moment you realize your father isn't just your father. He's a man walking uphill in a world that keeps trying to push him back down. That night, the house was too quiet. The world was too tilted. And everything felt fragile in a way I couldn't describe. I kept thinking, why do people build a system just to sabotage it? Why do adults pretend fairness lives in books, but not in their hearts? Why does the truth have to fight so hard for air? And somewhere in the dark, I heard my brother crying, not loud, not childlike, a broken kind of crying, the kind that says, my heart learned something today, and I wish it hadn't. Tom Robinson was gone before we even had time to understand what it meant for him to be alive. That's the part that keeps echoing. You think people get a chance to breathe between tragedies, but sometimes the world stacks them on top of each other like it's trying to see how much grief a family can carry before they break. They said he tried to escape, tried to run, tried to climb the prison fence. But I kept thinking, why would a man run towards bullets unless he'd already been sentenced inside his own mind? It was peculiar how the adults didn't question it, how they said it like it was math, and math never lies. Atticus came home with the news, holding it in his hands like something fragile and sharp at the same time. He told us gently, but gently didn't help. Gentle only made the truth feel closer. Jim clenched his jaw so tight, I thought his teeth would crack, and he kept whispering. They didn't have to shoot him. They didn't have to shoot him. Like if he said it enough times, it might turn into law. I followed Atticus outside because I needed air. Or maybe I needed to see the sky, to remind myself the world was bigger than injustice. But even the sky fell off. Too wide, too empty, like it didn't know what to do with us. Atticus said he needed to go tell Helen Robinson. And I said, I'll come with you, without thinking. Sometimes your heart volunteers before your brain catches up. We walked down the road, quiet, except for the sound of gravel shifting under our feet. And the whole time I was thinking, how does a man prepare himself to break someone else's heart? It felt wrong that one good man had to carry so much bad news. When we reached Helen's house, Atticus stopped. He took a deep breath, the kind of breath that looks like it hurts. And then he knocked. Helen opened the door, already carrying years of exhaustion in her eyes. And when Atticus took off his hat, I felt my stomach drop because I knew that gesture. It meant something heavy, something permanent, something the world can't undo. He told her softly, too softly, like he was afraid the words themselves would shatter her. Helen staggered back like someone had pushed her, even though no one touched her at all. The sound she made wasn't crying. It was something deeper, something you hear and immediately understand, even if you never heard it before. I stood there thinking, how can a world let this happen and still pretend it's functioning? On the walk home, Atticus wiped his glasses on his shirt, even though they weren't dirty. That's something he did when he didn't want people to see the way his eyes changed. And I kept wondering how many invisible things grown men carry around. Things that don't show up on their shoulders, but weigh twice as much. By the time we got back, the neighborhood felt different, quieter, more hollow. And I realized something that scared me more than anything. Justice doesn't die loudly. It dies quietly, the way Tom did. Inside a fence nobody should have had to climb. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, telling myself, the world can't stay strong forever. It has to tilt back at some point. But even as I thought it, the darkness didn't move. Summer was ending, and the world felt stretched thin, like someone had pulled the days too tight, and they were starting to fray around the edges. School was coming back, but it didn't feel like school anymore. Not after the trial, not after Tom, not after watching the world pretend everything was normal when everyone knew it wasn't. Jim walked quieter now, a different kind of quiet. Not as usual, I'm thinking about something important quiet. This was the quiet of someone who didn't trust the world the same way anymore. And I kept thinking, I wish I knew how to fix the part of him that broke. But I didn't understand the part of me that cracked. We were walking home one afternoon, kicking rocks, listening to quesadillas scream at the trees like they were arguing with life itself. And that's when we saw him, Bob Ewell, leaning against the corner store like he owed the sidewalk, the street, the whole damn town. He spit in the dirt when he saw us, and for a moment, the air felt thick to breathe. Jim stepped in front of me in that instinctive way older brothers do, like he was built to be a shield before he even learned how to shave. Ewell grinned, a slow, sour grin that felt like it left a stain on the day. He said something about Atticus, something I won't repeat, something sharp enough to cut the skin off your innocence. I remember thinking, why do men like him wake up every morning still convinced they matter? The peculiar part is, he wanted us scared, and we were, but we didn't show it. Jim kept walking, his shoulders stiff, his fist balled up, and I followed, feeling that familiar heat in my chest, anger mixed with helplessness, like having a match and no flame. When we get home, Atticus was reading in his chair. His glasses were low on his nose. He looked peaceful in that way people look peaceful right before you tell them something that ruins it. Jen told us what happened, every word, voice steady, but shaking under the surface. Atticus listened, nodded slowly, and closed his book. Bob Ewell has a grudge, he said. And men with grudges are dangerous in direct proportion to their own ignorance. I didn't fully understand what that meant, but it sounded like the kind of truth grown-ups say when they want you to feel safe without promising anything. Later that week, Bob Ewell lost his job. Then he blamed Atticus. Then he started drinking more. Then he started talking too much. The wrong kind of talking. the kind that buzzes around time, like a hornet looking for something to sting. And part of me kept thinking, he's just noise, angry noise, no more dangerous than a barking dog. But there was another part, the quieter part, that whispered, barking dogs still bite. I started noticing things. Footsteps behind us that faded when we turned. Rustling in the trees on our walks home from school. A feeling in the air like someone was waiting for something awful to happen. Jen said it was just my imagination. Atticus said it was probably nothing. But Boo Radley's window lit up one night. Just a flicker, but enough for me to see it. And I wondered, what does a man do when he sees danger that isn't his, but feels like it is? That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Ewell's grin in my mind. And the peculiar thing was, I wasn't afraid of him hurting me. I was afraid of what he wanted to do to the people I loved. Halloween night came around, and the town tried its best to pretend the year hadn't been carved open and left bleeding. People hung paper ghosts and pumpkins like decorations could scare away the truth. And I kept thinking, it's peculiar how humans decorate pain with laughter. Like putting a ribbon on a bruise makes it heal faster. There was a school pageant that night. I was dressed as him, a whole ham. Wireframe, painted cloth, itchy neck hole. The kind of costume adults think is adorable, but actually feels like wearing a prison cell shaped like dinner. And while I was standing backstage, sweating inside my ham self, I kept thinking, why do kids always go along with grown-ups' ideas of fun? The show went fine, except I missed my cue because I fell asleep, leaning on my own costume. People laughed, and normally I would have been embarrassed. But that night, the laughter felt soft, safe, like maybe the world still had places untouched by cruelty. Jan and I left the school late, too dark. The path home was lined with trees that looked different at night. Less like trees, more like question marks leaning over the road. I heard leaves crunch behind us, but Jim said it was just Cecil Jacobs trying to scare us. I believed him because I wanted to. Then we heard the footsteps again. Heavy, not playful, not like a kid at all. Someone was following us. Close, too close. Jen whispered, "Run." And we did. My ham costume slowing me down. My legs trapped inside that ridiculous wireframe. I kept thinking, this is why kids shouldn't dress up as food when danger exists. Then the running man lunged. Everything became noise and darkness. Jim shouting, me trembling, hands grabbing at me, scraping at the costume, breathing, hot, angry, sour with alcohol. Bob Ewell had finally chosen his moment. I heard Jim struggle. heard a crack that sounded too much like a breaking branch. My heart punched against my ribs. I was thinking, is this how stories end? Just like that? In a ditch? While the world keeps spinning? Then another sound entered the chaos. Soft, deliberate, different. A presence, a shadow, a quiet force that didn't belong to Ewell or us. Someone grabbed Ewell, pulled him back, struggled in the dark. I couldn't see anything through the slits of the ham costume, only shapes colliding. Then silence, a heavy, final silence. Jim was carried away by someone's arms, gentle arms, careful arms, arms that held him like it mattered. I stumbled home behind them, my costume bent and useless, my breath loud inside the shell. And when we reached the porch light, I saw him clearly for the first time. Boo Radley, standing there like a ghost who'd finally decided to step into the world of the living. His skin pale, his eyes soft, his hands hovering over Jim, as if afraid they might drift away from their purpose. He looked at me the way a man looks at something fragile he's been watching from far away for a long time. And I kept thinking, this is him, the man the town whispered about, the monster in the attic, the shadow behind the door. But he doesn't look like danger at all. He looks like kindness wearing the face of loneliness. Atticus came rushing out. Sheriff Tate followed. Then the question started. What happened? Who did what? How did we get here? But all I could focus on was Boo Radley's hand, trembling slightly at his side, like saving us had taken every bit of courage he had. I reached out, touched his hand, softly. It's okay, I whispered, and I meant it. The house felt different with Boo Radley inside it. Not dangerous, not strange, just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like somebody finally exhaled after years of holding their breath. But he stood in the corner, thin as a shadow, pale as moonlight. His hands hung at his sides, like he wasn't sure whether he was allowed to exist in the same room as everyone else. And I remember thinking, it's peculiar how some people learn to take up less space than they deserve. Atticus knelt by Jim, checking his breathing, brushing the hair off his forehead. His face looked older, creased with worry and something heavier than exhaustion. Sheriff Tate was talking low, trying to piece together what happened out there. And I kept wanting to shout, Boo saved us. Why can't you see it on him? Why can't you see the truth glowing off him like a lantern? But Sheriff Tate saw it. He wasn't a man who missed things. He looked at Boo with an understanding that didn't need words. Then he looked at Atticus and said, Bob Ewell fell on his knife. Atticus stood slowly, adjusting his glasses like he didn't trust what he just heard. That's not what happened, he said, his voice steady, but his heart wasn't. Jen said, Jim didn't. Tate cut in. and he won't ever have to think he did. Atticus stared at him, torn between honesty and protection. That was always his battle: trust versus mercy, justice versus kindness, head versus heart. And I saw Sheriff Tate watching Boo Radley out the corner of his eye, as if measuring the weight of what the truth would do to a man who barely spoke, barely breathed, barely lived outside the walls of his own house. Sheriff Tate said it again, firmer this time. Bob Ewell fell on his knife. Atticus swallowed hard. But he didn't like loose ends or bent truths or moral shortcuts. But then he looked at Boo, really looked at him, a man who never hurt anyone, a man who watched the world without being invited into it, a man who stepped outside the shadows only when 2 children needed saving. And I saw it dawn on Atticus like a surprise he didn't expect. Telling the whole truth would be like killing a mockingbird. I thought, that's what adults never understand until the moment forces them. Honesty isn't always the highest kindness. Sometimes the truth is a knife too sharp for the wrong hands. Bob shifted his weight, eyes darting around the room like he was searching for an escape. His fear wasn't of punishment. It was of attention. The spotlight itself was danger. Sheriff Tate said, "Let the dead bury the dead." Mr. Finch. And that was the end of it. Not argued, not debated, just accepted by the air. Atticus finally nodded, but the nod wasn't for Tate. It was for Boo. A promise silently made: "You saved my children, and I will save you." When things settled, I turned to Boo. He looked at me like he wasn't sure it belonged in any moment where someone was looking back. "Would you like to see Jim?" I asked. My voice felt small, but true. He nodded, just once, soft like a leaf turning in the wind. I led him down the hallway. Each step felt like walking through someone else's dream. And I kept thinking, is this what growing up is? Leading the person you feared into the room where your brother sleeps, without fear at all. Boo stood beside Jim's bed. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling, and touched Jim's hair. So gentle, it was like a breeze passing. And I realized something no adult has ever said. Boo Radley wasn't watching us all these years. He was caring for us, quietly, invisibly, like a guardian who never needed to be thanked. The morning came slow, not like it usually does, with the sun bursting over the rooftops and the air full of cicadas. This morning moved like it had been sleeping too long, stretching each second like taffy, reluctant to start. And I remember thinking, maybe the world is tired because it's seen too much wrongness at once. Atticus was in the kitchen, coffee steaming in the cup he never seemed to finish. He looked at us, Jim, me, Boo standing in the doorway. And I could see the question he wasn't asking. Questions about what happened, who saved whom, and whether some truths should never be spoken. Adults have that way. The louder their silence, the heavier the answer it carries. Jen stirs, but didn't speak. He kept glancing at Boo, like he was trying to memorize the shape of him in the room. And I thought, Jim's never going to see the world the same way again. He carries the memory of something invisible, something too strange to explain. Boo didn't move. He just stood there, like a shadow in the corner, too aware that any step he took might break the balance of this new morning. And I kept thinking, he saved us, but he's still the one who feels smallest in the world. Atticus finally said, "You all have breakfast. I'll get some plates." And somehow those words, so ordinary, so normal, made everything feel like it could be ordinary again. Maybe not fixed, maybe not right, but ordinary, human, survivable. Boo followed us to the table slowly, each moment careful, like he didn't trust that the world would let him sit without judgment. And Jim offered him a chair, which was strange, because Jim doesn't give chairs to strangers. But somehow, this wasn't a stranger, not anymore. I poured him a cup of milk. I watched the rain catch the sunlight through the window, and I thought about how peculiar it was, how life could move from danger to safety in one night. And yet the weight of the dark hours still hangs in your chest. We ate mostly in silence, not uncomfortable silence, the kind of silence that lets you notice the small things. The way the coffee stem curls, the way a cat stretches on the windowsill, the way a man who's never walked in the sun keeps shadows inside him anyway. And I realized maybe that's what the story was really about. Not the trial, not the danger, not even Boo's hands that saved us. It was about noticing, about understanding, about learning that kindness is quiet, that courage is invisible, and that sometimes the bravest thing anyone can do is step out of the shadows and let themselves be seen. Just enough. Boo Radley didn't say much that morning. He didn't have to. His presence said it all. I'm here. I was here. And I'll be here. And if you never see me again. And in that quiet kitchen, I finally understood. Some people are like mockingbirds. They sing softly. They do no harm. And the world owes them nothing. The days after Halloween felt strange, lighter. Somehow, but heavier too. Like the world had lost its balance. And we were just learning how to walk again on a tilted floor. And I kept thinking, everything happened, but nothing changed. Or maybe everything changed, because you can't see it yet. Jen stayed quiet most of the time. He walked over slower. He talked less. And when he did talk, it was about nothing, about ordinary things. As if trying to pretend the extraordinary hadn't tried to break us. I kept thinking, that's what growing up is. pretending the world hasn't tried to teach you its worst lessons while knowing it already has. Atticus went back to work. Same chair, same glasses, same quiet wisdom. But he looked older. Older in a way you didn't see until you watched him carry the grief he didn't make. Grief he didn't deserve. Grief that belonged to the world and not him. And I thought, adults bear more than their share. And children carry what they notice. Boo Radley disappeared like he always did, quietly, carefully, politely. Nobody saw him leave. Nobody said goodbye. But you could feel him there, the way a memory lingers in the air after the song is over. And I kept thinking, he was here. He saved us. And that's enough. More than enough. I went to the porch that evening and watched the yard fade into the kind of twilight that makes shadows look soft instead of threatening. And I remembered everything. The trial. The night Ewell tried to hurt us. The quiet bravery of a man nobody ever understood. I realized something. Some people enter your life only to remind you of what's worth protecting. Some people show up like ghosts in the corner of your eye to teach you about courage, kindness, and the way to silence. And sometimes the world is unfair, cruel, and heavy. But there are still mockingbirds, people who do no harm, who only give, who only sing softly. And the least we can do is notice them before they vanish. I thought about Atticus, about Jen, about neighbors, about Boo. I thought about how life keeps teaching you lessons you didn't ask for. I thought about how adults lie and children cry, and justice bends, but sometimes it bends enough to leave a trace. And I understood, truly, finally understood, that the right thing isn't always obvious. The right thing isn't always legal. The right thing isn't always praised. Sometimes the right thing is quiet, invisible, like Boo Radley. And in that fading light, I whispered to myself, mockingbirds don't ask for recognition. They just sing. And maybe, just maybe, we should try to listen.